Now, the actual item itself was trashed out, but what was found inside of it is going to make us some really good money. Hey, it's Don. Today I wanted to talk about some other things that I find. Now, it's always great to find vintage items in general. One of the areas that I do very, very well in is engravings. And one of the best places that I find engravings in is in old books. Books that are trashed out. Anytime I run across a book that is just totally trashed out, I always check it out. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you've seen that I found some books from the 1700s, the time of the Revolutionary War, and was able to pull some really nice sheet music out of it. Some of the earliest sheet music I have, and I believe those are from 1773 or somewhere in that range. Now, I acquired a German book just the other day just to get these engraved images out of it. Now, they're not in super condition, but as an early engraved image of buildings that aren't around anymore because of wars and things like that in Europe, these are excellent items. 14 to say 25 bucks a piece is what I should get out of these. Now, I have more than just this. Some of them aren't in the greatest condition, but these are just a few of the examples I got out of just one book that I bought. Now, the book was $2. There's around 36 or so of these engraved images. Now, at the prices I should get out of these, we're going to make hundreds of dollars out of a trashed out book. Every time I find them, as I said, I always dig through the books because many times people just miss that aspect of it. Now, military books. If you find an old trashed out military history book, a lot of the engravings, if it's a 19th century book, 1800s, a lot of the engravings will hold value to a military collector. If there's generals in that book and there's engravings of them, those will carry some horrendous value too. These are dateable because I can show the first page of the book. So if I want to back up the dates on something like this, I always save the date section of the book, the beginning title page or whichever page has the date of manufacture on it. And I use that in every listing, the same image for all of the etchings that I find or engravings that I find inside of that specific book. When booksellers sell leafs, like a page out of an old book from, say, the 1500s or 1600s, they always include a copy, or almost always, a copy of the very first dated page in the book so that you can see where it came from. These are super easy to sell. They can be scanned with our DS510 scanner, the Epson scanner that we have, and they'll come out fantastic. These are even easy to store. We store these sorts of things in accordions. The accordion that has a pocket for each day of the week, and we just number them to match whatever the title of it is. Again, we put the location of all of our items in the title. Now, this book was acquired with a bunch of other damaged books. It was basically a bulk lot deal, and I bought other books that have engravings in them as well. Now, even if the book wasn't dateable because, say, part of the book was gone, I would have still bought it. Many times you can tell how old these are because of the paper. It's called laid paper. If you hold it up to the light, you'll see like rows or lines running across the page. And that's built and that's embedded into the paper because of how the paper was made back in those days. So you can almost always tell how old the engraving is, even if the first part of a book is missing. I've bought half of a book before for 50 cents or less. I've been given sections of books that have engravings in them for nothing, because those engravings weren't seen as valuable because the book itself was damaged. Now, one of the biggest types of books that you should be looking at for engravings are anytime you see a leather cover of any kind, even if there's no spine or it's just totally ratted out. Books in general that are damaged, as long as they're early enough, and mostly 19th century, pre-1900 books. I almost never buy a post-1900 book, 20th century, because there's usually not engraved images in it. So most of the time it's not going to be worth yanking out pages of illustrations from books newer than 1900. And even in the 1890s, 1880s, you won't find engravings in many books. You will find photolithography used or some other form of printing instead of actual engravings. Engravings were very expensive to do, and most of them had to be placed in the book, depending on how old the book is, manually. They had to be tipped in sometimes. Sometimes they were printed with the book, but either way it had to be assembled by hand, so they were very expensive. Each engraving is stamped one by one into the paper. A sure sign that it's an engraving is the indentation from where the plate actually stamped onto the paper. It will leave an indentation or a line marking around the image itself, which these do have. So you got to know a little something about engravings. Now, for those in my Patreon group, I even have a little tool that's available that'll help you distinguish if it's a real engraving or not. There are some telltale signs that will help you determine if it is engraved or if it isn't. And an engraving is ink that's been pressed onto the page, so it leaves a raised image or a raised spot anywhere that you see the image itself. It's kind of like the same technology that's used on modern bills, where if you rub your fingernail over it, you can actually feel the ink. And that is what an engraved image will be. Again, not every engraved image is going to be worth something. The unique ones, the interesting ones, someone famous, portraits, engraved portraits I always do phenomenally well in. We sold one not too long ago of Abraham Lincoln, and it went for a small fortune. It was an original one from the time he was still alive. So that is another consideration. Presidential ones do extremely well if they're early. Again, early presidents. 1880s or before is usually what you want in most engravings of famous people. Now, I'm not saying that images from modern day, say 1910, World War I, World War II, won't sell, but if you're looking for specifically engravings, you want real engravings, you want vintage ones, and they have to have some neat or interesting or collectible content. That's why I try to tie ones to other collectibles. Like an engraved image of something tied to a specific railroad. Those would be of interest to collectors. As I said, military personnel, transportation in general is good. So like from a specific ship or showing a specific ship. Another thing on engraved images is the size doesn't always matter. Some of the smallest ones can be worth more than any of the large, massive ones. It depends on how many were produced in any time frame. Another thing to consider is sometimes the same engraved image may have been produced for many different years, and they had to redo the actual original engraving plate. So there'll be differences in them. So you can tell if it's an original from the first pressings versus a later pressing because they had to fix the engraving plate at some time. It's basically just carved, and at least the time frame these were made, it was carved into copper mostly or steel. And that wears out after hundreds and hundreds of copies of that engraving are stamped out and printed. So that's one thing, one aspect of these you need to pay attention to. But that's what I have for you today. Pay attention to them. Those old scrapped out books can get you some massive amounts of money if you know what you're doing, you know what you're looking for, they're the right age and the right type of material. You just got to pay a little extra attention. The damaged books we've bought for years, and we've always made good money on them. But anyway, that's what I have for you today. Hopefully that gave you some ideas, some thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell all your friends.
What does a youngster look for in a Christmas toy? Fun, excitement. What do you look for? Same thing, of course, plus something else. Call it value. Here's a brand new toy that has both. The new Texaco jet fuel truck. Looks just like the real trucks you see at airports. It's built big and rugged, so your youngster can ride on it. And an exclusive steering mechanism makes it the most maneuverable toy truck you've ever seen. It's hard to outgrow a toy that's as much fun as this. But what about value? Well, the Texaco jet fuel truck is built of heavy gauge steel and made with a beautiful eye for detail. Best of all, it costs $4.98, though it compares to trucks costing 2 and 3 times as much. Charge it on your Texaco credit card. It's a great Christmas present for any boy or girl. And it's only at Texaco, where for fine quality products, trust your car to the man who wears the star.